It was a warm afternoon in 1480, and the skies over Rome shimmered with the soft golden light that seemed to set the city itself ablaze. But I wasn't looking up at the ruins of the ancient city or its magnificent basilicas. No, my gaze was fixed on the stone streets beneath my feet and the buildings that still stood as silent witnesses to centuries of history. They whispered their tales to me, asking, no, demanding, could something new be created here? Could I, Leonardo da Vinci, reshape the heart of the empire with the mind I'd spent years perfecting? It was a thought I hadn't considered before. Rome, the city of emperors and gods, wasn't a place for an architect like me, was it? Sure, I'd honed my skills as a painter and inventor in Florence, crafting flying machines and anatomical studies, working with the Sforza family in Milan on war engines and stage designs. Yet, architecture, that was different. It was the heart of power, the bones of a nation. Could I take on such a monumental challenge? Should I? I'll be the first to admit it. I was terrified. Rome was no place for a man who'd yet to construct a lasting masterpiece. But then, that's what made it so exciting, wasn't it? Rome, the heart of the world, needed a vision that was unlike anything seen before. It needed an architect who could merge the grand tradition of the ancients with the daring brilliance of the Renaissance. It needed me. The year was 1480, and I was receiving a commission, a rare one, to work on a project for none other than the Pope himself. Not just any project, but the design of a new structure that would leave its mark on the eternal city forever. I can still remember the day I received the invitation, a letter sealed with the insignia of Pope Sixtus IV. My hand trembled as I tore open the wax, wondering what such a powerful man could want from a humble artist and scientist like me. But when I saw the words, it hit me like a thunderclap. To design the new St. Peter's Basilica, an architectural marvel, a testament to the might of Rome and the Catholic faith. I stared at the letter for a long while, half in disbelief, half in awe. St. Peter's, the sacred site where the first pope had been buried, a place that already bore the weight of millennia of faith. And now, here I was, tasked with the impossible. But what if, in that moment, instead of taking up the challenge, I had chosen a different path? What if I had turned down the Pope's offer and instead decided to stay in Florence, continuing my studies of anatomy and flight, leaving the stonework of Rome for someone else? Rome would have been a very different place. You see, the architecture of Rome at that time was a paradox. The ancient ruins were scattered throughout the city, remnants of a lost empire, and the people, artists and architects alike, were looking to the past for inspiration. The city was a living museum, and every stone carried the weight of centuries. But what it lacked was a modern vision. It needed a master who could think not just in terms of the past, but of the future. A man who understood the principles of geometry and the natural world. I knew what could be done. I had studied Vitruvius, the ancient architect who believed that architecture should be based on proportion, harmony, and the order of the universe. I had examined the ancient ruins of Rome and seen what the Romans themselves could not see, the beauty of design hidden beneath their chaos. And I had a mind that was capable of understanding both the logic and the imagination required to breathe new life into these ideas. But the question was, could I convince Rome to let go of its obsession with the past? Would they accept something as radical as my designs? On the evening of that fateful day, as the moonlight filtered through the windows of my study in Florence, I knew this wasn't just a commission. It was a battle between the past and the future, between the ghosts of the Roman Empire and the boldness of the Renaissance. Rome was a city built on power, on the might of emperors, on the backs of gods. But what if, instead of simply worshiping the past, we used it as a foundation for something new? What if we could create a structure not only of stone, but of the future? One that would blend the legacy of the ancients with the boundless possibilities of the human spirit? What if I could be the one to make that vision a reality? With a deep breath, I accepted. But this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, convincing the Vatican that my radical ideas would work and pushing them to imagine a world where the impossible was possible. The first time I set foot in Rome, it was as if the city itself was watching me, sizing me up. The narrow streets wound around ancient columns, and the towering buildings cast long shadows over the cobblestone roads. I could feel the history in the air, the grandeur of the empire, the weight of centuries pressing down on the city. It was a living museum, but one that hadn't yet come to terms with the future. I was both an intruder and a liberator, a man from the future about to change everything. The Pope's architects, men seasoned in the ancient traditions of the Romans, greeted me with skepticism. They looked at me as though I were an ambitious boy who had wandered too far from the safety of the drawing board. To them, architecture was about following established patterns, paying homage to what had come before. The dome of St. Peter's would be the highest in the world, a glorious echo of ancient Rome. But I was about to show them that the future wasn't a copy of the past. It was a leap forward. I was no stranger to breaking barriers. From my studies of the human body, I had learned the importance of proportions, of angles, of balance. It was the same in architecture. A building should not only stand firm, it should breathe, move, and speak to the soul. I wasn't just going to design a basilica. I was going to create an experience. The columns, the arches, the vaults, all of these needed to exist in a delicate harmony. But what if the very layout of the building could be a reflection of the universe itself? One of my first designs for St. Peter's was a revolutionary idea: the central plan. Instead of a traditional basilica with its long, narrow aisles, I proposed a building that would rise up like a temple, its arms stretching outward in the shape of a Greek cross, symbolizing the divine balance of the world. A circle at the center of the design, the perfect geometric shape, would mirror the heavens themselves. It wasn't merely a building, it was a vision of the cosmos made tangible. The other architects were immediately opposed. "A circular design?" they scoffed. "That will never stand, let alone capture the gravity of this sacred place. You are playing with fire, Leonardo. The gods will not forgive this arrogance." But I was resolute. I had studied the ancient architects, and I knew their limits. I knew their structures were masterpieces, but their designs were frozen in time. The world had changed. Science had advanced. The heavens were no longer a mystery to be feared, but a frontier to be explored. I had learned the secrets of flight, of hydraulics, of mechanics, and I saw how they could transform architecture into something new, something alive. I spent weeks poring over my sketches, adjusting the proportions, ensuring that the ratios were perfect. I used my knowledge of perspective to create a structure that would look vast from the inside, as though the ceiling were endless, drawing the gaze upward toward the heavens. The central dome would be unlike any other, an engineering marvel not just supported by stone, but by the forces of nature itself, the geometry and mathematics of the universe in harmony. In the midst of my studies, I would visit the ancient ruins of Rome, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the baths of Caracalla, and I marveled at how they had stood the test of time. They were beautiful, yes, but their design was trapped in a world that no longer existed. I understood their greatness, but I also understood their limits. They were frozen in the past, and the future demanded something else, something bold, something new. I was beginning to see the city through different eyes. The ruins weren't just symbols of the past. They were building blocks for the future. My vision for St. Peter's would become the heart of a new Rome, a city that blended the best of the ancient world with the bold aspirations of the Renaissance. As my design began to take shape, the Pope's advisors started to take notice. The skeptical architects softened their stance, intrigued by the possibilities of my concept. I was pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and though it made them uncomfortable, they couldn't deny that it was something extraordinary. The true test came when I presented my plans to the Pope. I had spent days perfecting the drawings, meticulously detailing every column, every arch, every piece of geometry. I knew that my design would challenge the very core of what they believed architecture should be, but I also knew it was the only way forward. I stood before the Pope in the Grand Hall of the Vatican, my heart pounding. The room was silent as I unrolled the massive scroll, revealing my design. The other architects, the courtiers, and the cardinals all gathered around, murmuring in disbelief. My fingers trembled as I held my breath, waiting for their verdict. The Pope studied the design carefully. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You have captured the divine order in stone, Leonardo," he said, his voice steady. "This is not just a building. It is a symbol of the heavens themselves. It will be a testament to the genius of the human spirit." I could hardly believe my ears. I had won. And in that moment I realized that I had not just won the commission to build St. Peter's Basilica. I had won a battle, not just for myself, but for the future of architecture. But as I left the Vatican, a strange feeling settled in my chest. I had succeeded, yes, but with this victory came a weight. The city of Rome, the Pope, and all of Christendom now looked to me. The eyes of the world were on me, and the pressure to create something that would stand the test of time, to create something perfect, would follow me for the rest of my life. And yet, despite the doubts and the challenges, I was certain of one thing. I was about to change the world. Rome had accepted my vision, but now came the hardest part: execution. The design was no longer just a set of sketches. It was a promise that would either elevate my name to the heavens or bury it beneath the weight of failure. There was no room for error. This wasn't just about creating a building. It was about creating an idea that would transcend the stone, the mortar, and the marble. This was the challenge of my life. The first night after the Pope had granted me the commission, I could hardly sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, with calculations, with concerns. The central dome, how could it possibly stand? The very idea of it was groundbreaking. I had envisioned a dome that would soar higher than anything the world had seen, a structure that would make even the Pantheon's great dome seem modest by comparison. But such a design required something extraordinary, something beyond the limits of what had been tried before. The traditional methods wouldn't suffice. I needed to think like an inventor, not just an architect. I spent the following weeks poring over my sketches, refining every curve, every angle, every detail. I needed to ensure that the load would be evenly distributed, that the weight of the dome wouldn't collapse the entire structure. For that, I turned to my knowledge of physics and engineering. I recalled my work with water, my studies of hydraulics, the machines I had designed in Milan. They were all tools in my mental arsenal, ready to be put to use in the service of this grand vision. I visited the great structures of Rome again, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and studied them with a new perspective. The Romans had built with precision, their methods relying on the clever use of arches, vaults, and weight distribution. But their understanding of materials was limited. They hadn't yet unlocked the full potential of geometry and mechanics. That was what I could offer them, a building not only of stone, but of principles, of ideas that could withstand the test of time. One evening, after a long day of calculating load-bearing ratios and testing new methods of reinforcement, I stood atop one of the hills overlooking the city. Rome stretched out before me like a tapestry, ancient, weathered, and yet eternal. The ruins whispered of greatness, but the future I knew was not in the past. It was ahead of me, in the designs I had sketched, in the mathematical formulas I had written down. The challenge was not just technical, it was artistic. Every inch of this building had to be harmonious. Every stone, every column, every arch needed to speak the same language. I was not just building a church, I was creating an experience, an emotional journey for anyone who stepped inside. The interplay of light and shadow, the perspective that would pull the viewer's gaze upwards. This was the soul of the design. Every element had to lead the observer's eye to the center of the dome, where the divine light would pour through, symbolizing the presence of God Himself. It was not just a physical structure, but a spiritual one. As I began to put my ideas into action, the reality of what I had taken on became clearer and more daunting. I was surrounded by stone and mortar, by men who knew the craft, but not the vision. They were builders, not dreamers. I had to communicate my designs not just in terms of aesthetics, but in the language of construction. Every beam, every support had to be explained in detail, and then came the politics. The Pope, the cardinals, the other architects, they all had their opinions. They questioned my methods, my materials, my timeline. They were comfortable with the traditional ways, the old ways, and my ideas, my radical ideas, were unsettling to them. But I didn't care. The more they doubted, the more determined I became. I would show them what could be done if only they were willing to trust in something greater than tradition. In the light of the Renaissance, the old ways had to give way to the new. The future was here, in my mind, in my sketches. I would bring it to life, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Construction began in earnest. As the foundations were laid, I started to feel the enormity of the task. Rome had no shortage of grand buildings, but St. Peter's was to be different. It would be a building that could stand for centuries, not just as a house of worship, but as a symbol of human achievement. I knew that whatever happened, my name would be forever tied to this place. This project would define me, for better or for worse. I remember the first time the scaffolding was raised to start on the dome. It was a humbling sight. From the ground, it looked like nothing more than a cluster of wooden planks and ropes, a mere skeleton of what was to come. But I could already see it in my mind's eye, the dome rising majestically, catching the light, a symbol of the divine, a testament to what mankind could accomplish when it dared to dream. The days were long, filled with calculations, adjustments, and arguments with the contractors. But at night, when the city grew quiet, I would walk the construction site alone, tracing the lines of my vision with my eyes. It was in these moments, standing in the shadow of the stones, that I knew I had embarked on something far bigger than myself. Yet, as the construction continued, I began to notice something. Despite my best efforts, there were cracks in the foundation, small but significant flaws in the design that I hadn't anticipated. It was a terrifying realization. Had I overreached? Had I bitten off more than I could chew? The fear of failure gnawed at me, but I refused to stop. I had come this far. Rome would see my vision, no matter the cost. And with every stone I laid, every calculation I made, I moved closer to fulfilling the promise I had made, not just to the Pope, but to myself. And so, with determination burning brighter than ever, I pushed forward, knowing that the future of Rome, of architecture, and perhaps even history itself, rested on my shoulders. As the months passed, I became consumed by the sight of St. Peter's slowly rising from the ground. Each stone laid, each column set in place, was a step closer to the impossible vision I had set before me. Yet, despite my careful calculations and unwavering resolve, I began to notice something unsettling. The foundation, the very base upon which the entire structure would stand, was showing signs of weakness. Tiny cracks had begun to appear in the walls, lines of fracture that stretched like dark veins through the marble. My heart sank each time I inspected them. The men who worked for me, those skilled artisans and laborers, saw nothing of the kind. To them, these were just the natural stresses of construction, the pressure that time and materials would naturally exert. But to me, these cracks were more than that. They were a sign of something deeper, a flaw in the design, something I had missed. I spent sleepless nights combing through my notes, rethinking every aspect of the structure. What had I overlooked? The dome, the central feature of the basilica, was growing more complex with each iteration. Its weight, its proportions, they were perfect on paper, but the materials, the reality of construction, were proving to be something else entirely. Perhaps I had miscalculated the load-bearing strength of the stone. Perhaps the design, as daring as it was, wasn't meant to stand. The pressure weighed heavily on me. Every day I walked the site, feeling the weight of the task pressed down on me with each step. It wasn't just the cracks in the stone that troubled me. It was the expectations. The Pope, the cardinals, the people of Rome, they all looked to me. They had trusted me with this grand vision, and if it failed, it would be my failure. The city would never forgive me. The greatest city in the world, its eyes fixed on my work. I couldn't afford to let them down. The cracks were a constant reminder of the line between genius and hubris. I had reached for the stars, dared to design something that would stand as a symbol of mankind's reach into the heavens. But the heavens didn't care about my ambitions. The heavens would let my dreams crumble just as easily as they would let them soar. My confidence, my belief in my own abilities was beginning to falter. Yet I refused to stop. I had come too far. I would not be defeated by cracks in the stone or doubts in my own mind. It was the heart of the Renaissance itself that pulsed in my veins. The belief that mankind, through knowledge and art, could shape the world. And so, as my mind raced, I began to devise a solution. I returned to my notebooks, flipping through the sketches I had drawn years ago when I first started designing the basilica. I turned to my studies of engineering, of hydraulics, of the mechanics of flight. I needed to think like an inventor once more, to approach this problem as if it were a machine, not just a structure. There had to be a way to distribute the weight more evenly, to create a foundation that could bear the strain of the dome. It was then, in the quiet of my study, that the solution came to me, not in a flash of inspiration, but as a slow realization. The answer lay in the principles of geometry, of balance. The arches and columns I had designed were meant to work in harmony, to channel the weight from the dome down into the ground. But I had missed one crucial element. The foundation itself needed more support. I would reinforce the base, add more layers of stone, make it thicker and more stable. It would be a complex solution, but it was the only way to ensure that the structure would hold. I went to the construction site the next morning with renewed determination. The workers looked at me expectantly as I issued new instructions. We would rebuild the foundation, reinforcing it with additional materials and reworking the angles of the archways to better distribute the weight. It was an enormous undertaking, one that would delay the project by months, but it was the only way forward. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as the foundation was rebuilt. It was as if we were starting over, laying the groundwork for a new future. The workers, initially skeptical of my new approach, soon saw the wisdom of it. The cracks began to disappear, replaced by the solid strength of a foundation that would support the weight of the dome. The city, too, began to feel the shift. The Pope's advisors, those men who had once questioned my every move, began to offer their support once again. They saw the determination in my eyes, the unwavering belief that this vision was worth the sacrifice, and slowly, surely, the basilica began to take shape once more. The arches rose higher, the columns grew taller, and the dome, oh, the dome, began to soar in a way that made my heart race. It was a testament to human ingenuity, to the power of knowledge and art combined. This was no longer just a building. It was a dream made real. But as the construction moved forward, so too did the weight of my success. The further I pushed, the more questions arose. Would it truly stand the test of time? Would Rome accept my vision? Would I be remembered as the man who reinvented architecture or the one who dared too much and failed? Each day brought new uncertainties, new challenges, and yet I could not turn back. I had seen the cracks in the stone, but now I also saw the potential of what lay ahead, the possibility of something that could change the world, that could transform not only Rome, but the very way we thought about architecture. The journey was far from over, but I could feel the future in my hands. The city was about to witness something extraordinary. The months stretched on, and the sight of the dome slowly taking shape was a bittersweet symphony. It seemed as if every victory was tempered with new doubts, every step forward shadowed by the enormity of what I had set in motion. Yet, as I walked through the half-constructed basilica, amid the scaffolding and the workers, I could feel the pulse of something grander, something beyond even the limitations of stone and mortar. It wasn't until the scaffolding began to rise higher, revealing the curvature of the dome, that I truly saw the possibility of what we were creating. The marble gleamed beneath the midday sun, and I could see it all. Every angle, every curve, every line of the blueprint I had drawn so many months ago. The light of day filtered through the unfinished arches, casting a soft glow on the stone, illuminating the very spirit of the vision. And in that moment, I knew it was worth it. The years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the constant push against the tides of doubt. Rome was changing, not just physically, but culturally, spiritually. I had set out to build more than a basilica. I had set out to build a symbol of what humanity could accomplish when it allowed its imagination to soar beyond the bounds of tradition. And as the dome grew, so did the sense of a new world unfolding, a world that was not afraid to take risks, to challenge the limits of what was thought possible. One evening, when the sun had dipped below the horizon and the workers had left for the night, I stood alone in the center of the basilica. It was eerily quiet, the echo of my footsteps resonating in the vast emptiness. I gazed up at the dome, now nearly complete, the silhouette of the grand structure illuminated by the pale light of the moon. The great dome, my dome, was a thing of beauty, a thing of brilliance, but it was more than that. It was a declaration, a defiance of the world as it had been. It was the Renaissance made flesh. I closed my eyes, allowing the silence of the moment to wash over me. It was then that I understood. This wasn't just my masterpiece, it was the world's. It was the work of countless men, of the city itself, of every person who had ever dreamed of reaching higher, of doing something greater than themselves. It was a gift to humanity, a symbol of the power of creation and innovation. But there was another layer to it, one that I had only begun to understand in the quiet of the night. In a world ruled by kings and popes, by men of power and wealth, my work was something more. It was a testament to the fact that anyone, even a bastard child from Vinci, could dream beyond their station, could defy the odds, and create something that would endure long after they were gone. It was a reminder that genius wasn't limited by birthright or wealth. It was a force that could rise from anywhere, at any time. As the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, spilling light onto the unfinished basilica, I knew that my work was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, more doubters. But the world would never forget what we had done here. This was not just a building, it was the embodiment of the Renaissance, a vision of a new age. And I, Leonardo da Vinci, had played my part. Years from now, when the people of Rome stood beneath the dome, when they marveled at the arches and the columns, they would not just see a building, they would see the culmination of a dream that had started in the countryside of Vinci, in the quiet of my study, in the hearts of men who dared to imagine. It was the dream of the future, made real through the power of art, science, and human will. The legacy of St. Peter's would endure for centuries, and with it, the legacy of the man who dared to build it. As I turned to leave the basilica that day, the sun fully risen and casting its light upon the stone, I couldn't help but smile. It was a smile of satisfaction, of peace. I had done what I set out to do, and the world would never be the same.